Um, so yeah, I'm recording now. I'll just quickly review what we did on Monday, and then we will get into the new stuff for today. And as usual, if you do have questions or you want me to go over something again, just let me know. Just feel free to interrupt me at any point. Um, let's look at what we've written so far. I'm going to change the font size. So I'm going to go to settings and go to huge font, and then I'll close this. And yeah, one of the things that's kind of nice about the new layout for Replit that we looked at on Monday is I can actually put these different scripts and things wherever I want now. And so we can actually look at our JavaScript and our HTML at the same time. So let's do that for a second. So we have this HTML page here, and it's not a ton of stuff in here. We just got started with this basic setup. So we have our normal head section. We have a style sheet, some other stuff in here, not very exciting. Then in the body section, we have a message paragraph. So I have a little paragraph with kind of like a welcome message. I forgot that we said coding land. I don't know why I called it that, but whatever, we'll go with that. So we're welcoming our user and we're asking them to input their name. So this is just a paragraph, just some plain HTML text, and we gave it this ID so we can change it in our JavaScript. So then we have an input, which is our text input for the user to put in their name. And we could use this for other things later, but so far we haven't had any other things that we want to use this for. But this is just a basic text input. It has a placeholder to, show that what is your name is what you want to put in there, and then an ID for us to reference in our code. Then we have this select, so the user can select what type of, I guess, coder they are, or developer, or designer, or whatever. And so this is just kind of a default select. We're only going to use this once, obviously, at the beginning. We'll kind of move on from that today, but we have some different options in here. And again, we have this ID so that we can reference it in our JavaScript, which we'll look at in a second. And then our last bit is this button to submit our responses. And what we talked about a bit on Monday is that we're actually using this button to submit multiple responses. So instead of having lots of different buttons on our page, we're just going to use this one button for the sort of onboarding of getting our character into the page. And then this paragraph that's commented out, I was just kind of showing that instead of writing a lot more HTML, what we're going to do is just change the content on the page using JavaScript. So we can avoid writing tons and tons of HTML and just use JavaScript to write the rest of our application. And then our last bit here, obviously, is just connecting our script. So now we can look at our script for a second. So the first thing that we do in this script is we get references to all of our HTML. So our message, we just say document.get element by ID message. And this message just has to match the message that we used, the ID that we used in our HTML. And so now we have a reference to that paragraph in our code, so we can set the value of the paragraph. We can hide the paragraph. We can change the style. We can do whatever is we want to do. Then we do the same thing with our text input, our character type, and our submit button. I have a variable here to save the username once we get that from the user. And then I was kind of demonstrating how we'll do some stuff with our character, but this kind of moved into our submit function. So let's actually just delete this because we don't really need it here. Then we set up an event to listen for when the user clicks on the submit button. It's going to go to on submit. And then in on submit, we have our first bit of onboarding, which is we get our username, and then we're going to greet that user. So we put their name into this greeting, and then we set the text content of our message, which remember is our paragraph in HTML. We set that to the greeting content. And then the last bit is that we show or we hide our name input and we display our our character type. Yeah, we're just going to add our second level of onboarding here. And then we're going to add in our first bit of our story. So that's just a little bit of a review of what we covered on Monday. I'm going to put this script back over here and put our preview window back over here. And let's continue. So we're going to finish up with our onboarding and then move on to doing some stuff with our data. Um, so in this onSubmit function, so we're gonna use this to get a couple of pieces of data. The first thing that we're doing is we're just getting the username, and the next thing that we're gonna do is get the type of user. So this is something that I haven't exactly, planned how this will be used, but it's just an example of different types of user data that we're gonna get. So I have my username here that's not set at the beginning. I'm going to add a comma and then just declare another variable called user type. And so we've got the username and we have to move on to getting the user type. And so I'm going to introduce a couple new things to do this. But once we're done with our onboarding, we're going to kind of move on to the next main part of our interaction. So I'm going to call this the onboarding section. And what I mean by onboarding is this is usually when a user joins a service or logs into a website. There's this thing called onboarding where we have to get some basic information from the user to create a profile or to set up their account or do whatever. So for us, we're just getting their name and then the character type that they want to kind of be inside of our story about. So far, it's not really about anything, but it's taking place in a place called Coding Land. So that's, we're going to get the type of character that they want to be first. So what I'm going to do to change onSubmit here, this bit of code is really only relevant if we don't know the username. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to change this function to say we only want to do this if we haven't gotten the username yet. And once we have gotten the username, we're going to move on. So what I'm going to do is add a condition here. I'm going to say if username does not exist and I'm going to put my code inside there. So I'm going to make this if statement, and then I'm going to wrap the bottom of the code down here. And then I'm just going to click the format button to take care of those indentations for me. Um, so that looks good. And so now this function will only collect the username if the username isn't already defined. And that lets me do a couple things. So for example, if my user already exists and I've saved their name in the database, if I'm getting the name from the database, then I'll ignore this part and I'll go to the next part. We probably won't get around to adding a database in the short amount of time that we have, but that's just the kind of thing that we might want to do. But the next thing that it'll do is when we click the button again, we'll ignore this section and move on to getting our user type data. So this will still work. And the nice thing about this too is I can click the button multiple times. If I haven't filled in the name, it's not going to move to the next section. So if I run this code here, if I click submit, oh, it does. Okay, so I guess the username does exist. That's kind of weird. Let's see what the value is. Let's say console.log username. Whoops. Okay, submit. It's undefined. Huh. So that's weird. Okay, so then this should be false. This is off to a good start. Okay, if not username, so that's true. Hmm. Oh no, you know what? I don't know why I'm saying not here. Uh, no, I do want to say not here. So what is going on? Hold on, sorry. Username, did I doubly define username somewhere? Uh, oh no, I'm doing the wrong thing. Whoops. Okay. So what I want to say, I need to get the text input dot value. Okay, so I need to add a second condition here. Sorry, I just forgot a step. So I'm going to say and text input dot value. So we need some value to exist to save our username. So now Okay, so now this is doing what we want it to do. If I don't put in the name here, then this code isn't going to run. So I actually need to check for two things, that I don't have a username and that there is some value here. So once I put in a username, I'll put in my name and then click submit. Now we go to the next section. So we capture the username and we set our greeting. So it says welcome Owen, and then it asks me to select my character, and I can choose a different character and then click submit. So now we have to deal with this second click here. And this preview is small, so I'm just for now, I'm gonna set the font size to double so it's easier to see. Oh, that's way too big. How is that double? Okay, let's just do 20 pixels, 24 pixels. Okay, that's better. Um, and let's set my, actually, this is only applying to the paragraph. So let's move this, and I'm just gonna do an asterisk to select everything. And there we go, it looks a little bit bigger. So that's just for the preview. I'll probably get rid of this later. Let's just put a note, remove later. Oh, it doesn't like that. Okay. Anyway, let's go back to our script. So the next thing I'm going to add here at the end is I'm going to say return. And you may or may not have seen this return keyword before. This basically just means it does a couple things, but I'm not returning anything here. What I'm doing is I'm basically just saying leave this function. So nothing else is going to happen after here. So I can add some more code down here. So if I say console.log next step, you'll see what happens the first time I run this. I'm going to put in my name and say Owen. Notice that the next step doesn't run. And that's because I put a return here. So if I don't have a username and I've put some value here, it's going to do all this stuff, and then it's just going to stop. So when I say return here, excuse me, that means that it leaves the function. So it never actually gets to this part that says next step. When I submit again, notice that it says next step this time. So the way that I can sort of like handle this onboarding is go through each step, but instead of having a bunch of like gross else, blah, 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 I just know what the steps are. And so I'm just going to return after each step so I don't have to worry about, continuing, having just like a big, long bunch of if else statements. So the next part I want to do is get the user type. So now I'll say if there's no user type, then we're going to do something similar. We're going to capture the user type like we did with the username. We're going to change the greeting, but we're not going to do it right away because we're going to start to actually get into our story. Um, I'm just doing 2 steps here. You could have as many steps as you want. So if you need to know more information about your user for your story or for your application, you would just add more steps here. But I already know everything that I want to know once I get these 2 pieces of information. So I'm just going to move into the story. So I'm not going to do this quite yet. And I'll probably just get rid of like the other stuff that's on the page. So I'll hide some more stuff that I am not going to need in the future. So let's set my user type. I'm going to say user type equals, and I need to use the character type select. And I'll do the same thing here. I'll just say dot value. This will give me whatever the currently selected value is. And then I'm going to hide some stuff. I don't need this anymore, so I'm going to say character type. And to hide this, I'm just going to say dot style to get the CSS, and then set property. And I'm going to set the display property to none. So that's going to hide my dropdown. And I'm actually going to hide my submit button as well. The only thing that I'm going to continue using is the main message part. So I'm going to say submit button dot style dot set property, and I can always bring these back later if I want to use them in the future. So let's set this to display none. And then I'm going to log my user type just to show that it worked. So I'm going to say user type here. Oops. Oops. And I'm going to return. So I could, again, I can add as many of these steps as I need to for my onboarding. So I'll just put a note here, add more steps here to collect different types of information. I'm just doing 2 just to keep it simple for the demo. So let's run this again. So, whoops. Oh, why did that happen? Oh, you know what? We need to add another check here. Let's say, what's a good way to deal with this? Let's just say username exists already. So if username exists already and there's no user type, then we're ready to move on. So now that shouldn't happen. Okay, so we do have to be careful about what we're doing in these different sections that we don't break it. But anyway, so if we have a username but we don't have a user type, nothing will happen here. So now I can submit my username. I can select my type. I'm going to be a UX designer. And now we can see down here, it knows that I'm a UX designer. And so we're ready to move on to the story. So the next thing I'm going to do is just call a function to set up the first bit of our story. So I'm going to say, this function doesn't exist yet, but I'm just going to invent it right now. I'm going to say setup scene. And so I'm going to say start the story. And this is going to be, again, sort of a choose your own adventure type story. We're going to have different sections and the user will be able to kind of choose, which section they want to go to. So my setup scene function is what's going to set up the scene for my story. And that's going to be based on the data that we're going to create in a second. So yeah, that's my onboarding. Again, I'm just collecting 2 pieces of user information, and I'll use that in my story. You could get more information. You could get different types of information. You could just skip this part altogether if you don't really care, if you don't want to use the user information. But we're just going over some ways to collect information from the user, either for a story or for a web app or for whatever your application might be. So now I have to make this setup scene function. So I'm going to close this up and come down here and say function setup scene. And so here's where we're going to have to start thinking about our data and how to organize it. And this is going to look a little bit similar to what we were doing with some of the Tone.js stuff, because we're going to use an object to organize our data, and we're going to look at like how to abstract that data. So what I'm going to do first is set up a scene, just coding it from scratch, and then I'm going to kind of reverse engineer it and put it into some data so we can recreate that scene. So let's set up our scene from scratch first, and then we'll go back and sort of reverse engineer it. So for our scene, we're gonna, we need a new message. So we're gonna start with the message. So we're just gonna say message.text content equals, let's say, I already said welcome to the username. And so let's just start with, let's say username plus, let's say, you are what did I say? User type plus user type. Okay, so we're just confirming that they chose their type. And we'll say, are you ready? Let's put a comma after this. So the string formatting is a little weird here. Um,
I have a question.
yeah.
So, assuming the user type starts with I forgot the word for it, but it has to be an N, not A. And I have both types, one type needs to have an N in it, and the other one needs to have an A.
Mm-hmm.
I forgot what's the word for that. The letter.
What do you mean?
My user type
Yeah.
starts with a letter that that you can't say A because it's grammatically incorrect. I forgot what it's called. It's uh hold
Oh,
on.
you're talking about a versus like if it starts with a vowel.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's gonna be an N. So how do I do that if I have both?
That's actually so that's like something I hadn't really thought about. Um, but what you could do, you probably want to like make a function to check like if you're using the user type to say you know you can just have like you could have another variable. This is probably what I would do. This is kind of a tangent, but it's an interesting question. So probably what I would do is I'd have another variable and we're going to organize this stuff in a better way in the future, but for now I'll just put it here. I'd have like a user article. That's what that's called, I think, grammatically, is an article. And then what I'd say is after I learn the user type, I would say like uh, if user type at 0, so that's the first character of the user type, dot no, I have to actually say if A, B, C, D, or no, what are the vowels? A, E, I, O, U. I mean, it's more complicated than this, honestly, because there are words that start with consonant letters but are pronounced as vowels that have to have an before them. You can tell this is something that I'm actually, that I'm interested in, but is like totally a huge tangent from what we're actually talking about. But so it's actually more complicated than just checking the letter. But what you could do is say, if this string of vowels, A, E, I, O, U, um, includes our user type at 0, so the first character in the user type, then our user article should be an. And otherwise, our user article is a. So that's like one way you could do it. I'm gonna take this out for now because I don't know if it'll work, but that's basically what you want to do. But there's actually for stuff like that, there are JavaScript libraries. So I think P5 has something. Um, that they use. Where is it? Do, 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 do. I know they have one. Particle. There's so many of these now. I don't see it. Maybe they got rid of it. Maybe it's no. I'm trying to remember what it's called. I actually do when I do stuff with language. I use Python because there's. Oh, here it is. Rita. Um, so this is like a uh, natural language processing library. I don't know if they'll have an example for exactly what you're talking about, but they probably do something similar. And so it works with P5, but it also has a standalone version. Uh, let's see, examples, reference. Um, so you can see it has stuff like conjugate, alliterations. Let's see if there's like a Yeah, I don't really see one, but you could do like JavaScript determine a or an before noun. So with Python, I use something called NLTK, which does this very easily. Um, why is this in C sharp? Yeah, you can see it's a pretty long function. So there's different ways to do it. It's way outside of the scope of what we're talking about. So I'm gonna just switch this so that we don't have to worry about it for now. Let's just change this because it's not really important what this greeting is. But it's a good question, and if you want to do something like that in the future, we could talk about it more. But it is kind of outside of the scope of this particular lesson. So let's simplify things a little bit. So let's just say you know, let's say username, or let's just do a string. Let's just keep it really simple. Let's just say, okay, your adventure is about to begin, and then we'll give them a choice of where they want to start their adventure. Um, and so we have a message, so then we have to give them options. So it's like a choose your own adventure story. We have to give them a couple of options. So they need something that they can click on. For now, we're just going to do buttons. We can add images or other things in the future, but for now, let's just add a couple buttons. So this is where we're going to use JavaScript to create HTML instead of just referencing it. So creating HTML with JavaScript. So to create some HTML, let's make a button. So let's say a constant option one, or I'll just say option one. So what we're going to do, it's similar to get element by ID. So we start with document, but instead of get element by ID, we're not getting an element that exists. We're creating a new element. So we say create element. And this is something that you might have done in P5. They just use create element by itself. They take out the document part, so they have their own function for that. But you can see, actually, it's nice that Replit has this like code hinting here. So the first argument is the tag name, and there's some options, but we don't want to use the options. So the tag is just the type of HTML element we want to make. We want to make a button. And then we have to set up that option. So we say option one dot text content equals start your adventure in the forest. So we'll just come up with like a um, what do you call it? Like a location, a setting. And so then we'll have a new option, const option two is document.create element, and it's a button. And you can already start to see how this is a lot of work and it's kind of boring. And if you have like 3 options or 4 options, it starts to get really crazy. We're not going to fix that quite yet, but we're just going to build this for a second. So option 2 dot text content equals start your adventure in the ocean. So I guess we're supposed to be in coding land. So let's say in function forest. This is getting goofy, but whatever. In
Your forest with double R.
Oh, is it one R? Thank you. Start your adventure in conditional. What's something that starts with a C? Cove. Okay. This is like one of those goofy, learning to code websites. Okay, so let's run this and see what happens. Okay, so our name is Owen. We are a front end person. And oh, wait, I didn't add this. Okay, so we do see your adventure is about to begin. We created these elements, but we didn't add them to the page. So not only do we have to create them, we actually have to tell them to go onto the HTML page. So that's the next step that I forgot. So the way that we can do that is we can say document.body. So we're getting a reference now to the actual HTML. So before we were just saying document, and we can say create element or get element by ID to create elements. But then we have to put the element on the page. Like when we write HTML, we have to say where it goes. So I'm just going to throw it into the body, just in the next section. So I'm going to say document.body, and then to add a new element, I use the method append child. And then I just put the element that I just created, option one, into the argument for append child. And then I'm going to do the same thing down here. I'm going to say document.body.append child, and this is option two. Okay, so now this will run, and we're going to look at the live preview in a second. Actually, let's just go over to the live preview already. And so we're just going to do this again. Name is Owen, stick with designer. Okay, so now we have a message, and then we have 2 options, and we have 2 buttons that we can click on. We can go to function forest, or we can go to conditional cove. They don't do anything yet because we haven't actually set them up yet. uh, but we'll look at how to do that in a second. But let's look at the elements. So because I just added it to the body, notice it's right here. It's actually after my script, so it adds it at the end. So when I say append, it's adding it onto the end. So here's the body section. So we said document.body, and then we append this button to the end. The message is still in the same place because we're just changing the text of the message. We're not actually adding new HTML there. But these new buttons, we're adding them on here. And so there's a lot of issues here, right? We've managed to add some buttons, and that's cool. Whoops, where's my thing? Okay, so we managed to add some buttons, but not only do we have to tell these buttons like what to do, we also have to um, uh, we have to get rid of them eventually, right? When we go to the next scene, we have to get rid of all this stuff. So there's a lot of stuff that we have to do here that's kind of a pain. So I'm not going to do it with both of my buttons. I'll do it with one button. And then what we'll realize is that it doesn't make sense to continue writing it this way. And what we need to do is create a data structure that will allow us to make more scenes without having to write tons and tons of JavaScript that's really kind of boring to write. Like writing document.create element, there's a reason P5, modifies this stuff so it's faster to write because this is a lot of code that kind of does the same thing. So we'll do one example of this, and then we're going to start adding some data. We'll see how far we get with that. So again, I'm only going to do this once, but I would have to do this with every option. So for option one, I have to add an event listener, right? So just like when I have the submit button, to know when the user clicks on it, I have to add an event listener. So I have to do that with my button. So option one dot add event listener, and I'm listening for a click, and then I have a function that I need to do once this is over. So let's say for my function, I need a name for it, so I'll just call it go to option one. It's a little crazy, but now I can define this function down here, go to option one. And for now, I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to do too much here. But what I'm going to do is just say console.log um, uh, option one. So we know that we clicked on the right option. And then I'm going to get rid of everything. So to get rid of everything, and this is not how we're actually going to do this, but if I were going to do it this way, I'd have to say option one dot remove because this is going to go to a new part of our scene. And then I'd have to say option two dot remove. So I'd have to remove all the stuff that, is part of my old scene. And then when I go to the new scene, that would actually change the message. But for now, I'll just say what the new message is. So I'll say message.textContent equals option one. I guess I don't need to do that and the log. So let's just get rid of the log and let's run this. Okay, so now I have start your adventure in function forest, start your adventure in conditional cove. Conditional cove is not set up, so if I click on this, nothing happens. If I click on function forest, we go to option one. And then we have to do the whole thing over again. So I'd have to either write it all inside of this function, which would look really insane, or I'd have to make a new function. It's like it would look really crazy. So what we need to do is create an abstract piece of data where where we add all this stuff that we need, and then we rewrite our JavaScript to work with that data. Um, so there's a couple main types of data in JavaScript, and we're going to use both in this, but we're going to start with an object. We've already talked about objects, but we're gonna start with an object here. So we're going to organize all of our data into an object. And for now, to make things a little bit simpler, I'm just going to start with a scene, and then we'll put it into a more complex object once we need to have more than one scene. So I'm going to create my scene first. I'm going to say constant scene, and I'm just going to make an object. Okay, so remember an object just starts with curly brackets, and we can assign it key value pairs. So the key is just the name of the thing that we want to set, and then the value is the actual value. So one of the things that we have to do to set up a scene is we have to set the message, the main message. So let's add into our scene a message, and then we'll just use this data here. So I'm going to take this data out of here. I'm going to cut and paste it into this message. And then now, instead of saying this, I can say scene.message. And so now you can see I can have multiple different scenes that have different messages. Instead of having this hard-coded data here, I just say scene.message, and that's going to give me this message. So if I have a different scene, I can have a different message, but this code will work the same way. So that's my first thing. So then I have different options, and this is going to get a little trickier. So let's say I have different options for where to go. And so this is where I need to use the other type of data that we have in JavaScript, which is an array. So an array is just a list. And a list is useful for something if you have like a bunch of different things, like we have different options, that they're all the same. Our scenes are going to be different because they have different text and they're going to have different names. But our options are all the same. They each have some text that we need to show, like start your adventure in function forest or start your adventure in conditional cove. But then they're also going to have a place that they need to go. So this data structure is going to be a little bit more complicated. We're not going to set up the whole thing quite yet, but we'll just start. So for a list, I use square brackets. So let's put a comment here. So this is our scene data, curly brackets for object, square brackets for array or list. JavaScript, we usually call it an array, but I feel like list, it's also, a list is also what it is, and I think that's a better term for it sometimes. So our first option, we could just start with the text, but we're going to need to add more stuff than that. We're going to need like the next scene. So to have multiple pieces of data within the option, what we're actually going to have is an object that's inside of our list. So we could imagine if we had option one, option two, each one of these is going to be an object. So in my list, I would have like a little object for option one, and then I'd have another little object for option two. And I can put, as many objects into lists. I can put lists into objects. With these two types of data, you can kind of use them however makes sense. So we're only going to have two options for this first bit. So I have two options, this object and this object. And so let's write the first one. And usually when I have a data structure like this, it's easier to read if I put these on different lines. So I'm just going to move each one of these to a different line. So now this will be a little bit easier to read because we have our options, but notice Replit makes this indentation for me. Our first option is going to be on its own line. Our second option will be on the next line, and then we can see the end of our list here. So this is option one, option two, and that's the end of the list. Okay, so we're going to add more to this next time, but for now, we just have some text. So the text for our first option is start your adventure in function forest. So I'm going to copy this and paste it in here. So that's option one. And option two is start your adventure in conditional cove. So I'm going to do this and say text and paste this here. So that's option two. And usually when I'm writing an object, I'll put like a little space here just to make it more readable. So this is the key for option one for the text, and this is the value. And then you can actually put a comma at the end of this one too. I usually actually will do that. That's called a trailing comma. You only need commas in between your list items until you get to the last one, and then this last one is optional. But it's easier to just put it there because if I want to add another option, I can just do that, and I'll avoid getting an error for not having a comma there. So you'll see it both ways. It's just a matter of preference. Okay, so now let's code this to work with using our options instead of hard coding everything. And then we'll be done with our demo for today. So what I'm going to do here, I have this scene object, and I'm going to get the data from it to set up the scene. And I'm going to use destructuring to do this just because I'm fancy and I like to use fancy new JavaScript things. So for destructuring, what I can do is I can assign some variables from a scene just by matching the variables. So for my scene object, I have a message and I have options. So I just say constant and then I use the object syntax, the curly brackets, and I say message and options, and then I just say equals scene. And so I'm basically just assigning these variables to the values in the scene. So this is the same as saying constant message equals scene dot message and constant options equals scene dot options. So I'm like taking these values up here out of this object and putting them into my function. Um, but I can use this shorthand for that so I don't have to, write all this stuff out. So let's remove those. And so now I can just say message.textContent equals message. So this message is from here, which is destructuring the scene object. And so it's going to here to get the message, and this is the message right here. So this is called object destructuring. And this is like hipster new JavaScript stuff that didn't exist until like 2015 or so. So, this is how people like to write it now, and it is a little bit faster to write anyway. I don't know if it's faster to run. Anyway, so we've destructured. Now we have our options. We're going to use another fancy JavaScript thing here. We're going to say options. And then instead of doing a for loop, which is nice, for loops are great. But a way to write this that's a little bit simpler is just to say options.for each. This is just like if we have a list like we do with our options, we can say for each, and this will just basically make a for loop for us. And we can give each option its own variable. So we say option, and then we go into this function. Oh, this is an arrow function. Let's not use an arrow function. Let's just use a callback function here uh, like that. Okay. So the for each function takes a callback function. So we can just write function, and then we're going to have an option here. And each option is going to be this one of these objects. So we're going to be able to go through both of our objects. That's what for each means. It basically just means like for each of these options. And then we can destructure these as well. So I'm going to say constant text equals option. And so now I have the text for this option. And so this is going to generate both of uh, our buttons in one bit of code. So now let's grab our code from down here that we wrote earlier, and we're going to repurpose this for both of our buttons so we won't have to write it twice. So I'm going to change this to constant button. So we're going to create a button. Then we just have to assign the text to the button. So this actually I'll just write from scratch. This will be faster. So I'll say button.textContent equals text. Okay, so we're getting the text from our option, from each option. So that's this step. We can get rid of that now. And we can get rid of these ones too. So we're doing this with a list instead of doing it by hand for both of them. So then we can append our button to our document. So I'm just going to take this code from down here and put it back here. And so this is our button. And then finally, we have to add our event listener. So I'm going to go to our event listener here and paste this up here. And now I'm going to get rid of this. Or no, let's actually just put this function into our event listener like this. So we can put that whole function directly in here. So this will look a little bit nuts, but this is something that you'll see a lot in JavaScript. And I'm just going to hit the format button to format all this. Um, and we'll look at other ways to do this later. Um, and so then we just need to change option here to button. And I'm not going to do this quite yet. Let's get rid of all of this. And let's just say console.log. And we'll just log uh, next scene. We're not going to do anything quite yet. But we'll see that both of our buttons will do this. So let's run this. Doesn't like it. It's taking a while to load. Let's try loading it over here. Okay, here we go. So I add my name, add the type, and so now I can either go to functional forest or go to conditional cove. It looks exactly the same, but I just used one bit of code to do it for both buttons. And if I click conditional cove, uh-oh, they don't work. Let's do a hard refresh. Make sure this is working. Uh-oh, okay. Looks like it's not. Let's try it over here. Huh. Okay, something weird is happening, but let's give this a try. I'm just going to say console.log button and make sure these are working correctly. Okay, so we add our name. Okay, so there's our first button, there's our second button, and when we click, there we go. I don't know why it wasn't working, probably a caching issue. But now if we click functional forest, it'll go to the next scene. If we click conditional cove, it'll go to the next scene. And what we're actually going to do is we're just going to call setup scene again, but we're going to tell it to call a new scene. So we're going to give it a different scene to call. And that's what we're going to go over in the next demo, how to make this data a little bit more complex. But I think this is good for today, just going over some of the basics. So in this example, what we did is basically just start creating our data, but then also looking at how to make some HTML with our JavaScript, and also do it in a sort of sensible way where we're using a list of buttons that have one thing different. The only thing that's different about these buttons is their text. So there's no reason to write all that code twice. As long as we can get the text for each one, then we can add our buttons the same with using the same code, but putting it in a loop so we reuse the code in an efficient manner. Let's actually move this comment down here. Okay, let's say loop over options, creating HTML.js, and then let's log the text here so we know that the two buttons work differently. And then we're in a good place to pick up next time uh, with adding multiple scenes to our story. Okay, so I'm going to save this and I'm going to stop the recording.